The story doesn't begin with a wedding. It begins with a man lying in a hospital bed, waiting for the end. Jimmy Burke was once one of the most feared names in New York, a man who planned one of the biggest cash robberies in history, a man who controlled people, money, and silence. But in the end, none of that mattered. He was 64 years old. His body had been weakened by illness, and the last place he would ever see was not the streets he once ruled. It was a prison hospital. For years, Burke had lived behind bars. No freedom, no power, no escape. Just time. Time to think, time to remember, and time to realize that the world outside had moved on without him. But before everything ended, someone came to see him. His daughter. Catherine Burke walked into that hospital room quietly. No cameras, no noise, no drama. Just a daughter and her father. She sat beside him, held his hand, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. Not the crimes, not the past, not the blood tied to his name. Just family. But Catherine wasn't just any daughter. She had made a decision years earlier, a decision that shocked even people who had seen everything. She got married. Not in a church, not in a hall filled with guests, but inside a federal prison. And the man she married was Anthony Bruno Indelicato, a man known for one thing: he followed orders, no matter how serious they were. This was not a normal relationship. This was something deeper, something built on shared past, shared silence, and shared loyalty. To understand this story, you have to go back to a cold December night in 1978. John F. Kennedy International Airport. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The city was quiet. Inside the cargo terminal, everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. A group of men walked in, calm, focused, prepared. They weren't guessing. They knew exactly where to go, because someone from the inside had already shown them. This wasn't luck. This was a plan. Within a short time, millions of dollars in cash were taken, gone just like that. No noise, no chaos, just precision. It became known as the biggest cash robbery America had ever seen. And behind it was Jimmy Burke. For a while, everything worked. The money disappeared. The operation stayed quiet. But there was one problem. Too many people knew about it. And in that world, loose ends don't stay loose for long. One by one, people connected to the robbery started disappearing. Not officially, not publicly, just gone. Because Burke understood one rule better than anyone. If someone knows too much, they become a risk. But the biggest threat didn't come from inside. It came from someone who was caught and decided to talk. Henry Hill had been part of that world. He knew the system. He knew the people. And when pressure came from the law, he made a different choice. He cooperated. Everything he knew, he gave it up. Names, plans, details. That was the moment everything changed. Burke was arrested. Then came the trials, one case after another. Charges connected to fraud, fixing games, and finally, murder. The system closed in, and this time there was no way out. He was sentenced to decades in prison, and unlike others, he would never walk free again. Years passed. The man who once controlled everything now had nothing. No streets, no crew, no power, just walls. But outside those walls, his family still existed. He had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. And that daughter, Catherine, was different. She didn't walk away. She didn't disappear. She stayed. She visited him again and again. She kept his name alive, even when the world tried to forget it. Then, in the early 1990s, something happened that would change her life. She went to visit someone at a federal prison. A normal visit, nothing special, until she saw him. Anthony Bruno Indelicato. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was calm, quiet, watching. But his name carried weight. Because Bruno wasn't just another inmate. He was part of a powerful crime family. The son of a man who had once held serious influence, and a man who had already proven himself. Carmine Galante. That name had once controlled everything. But power creates enemies, and in 1979, a decision was made. Galante had to be removed. It happened in day broadlight, inside a restaurant. People were eating, talking, living normal life. Then suddenly, gunfire. Everything changed in seconds, and among the men involved was Bruno. That moment changed his life forever. It gave him status, respect, fear, but it also sealed his fate. Because years later, when the government built its biggest case against organized crime, his name was on the list. He was arrested, put on trial, and convicted. 40 years in prison. By the time Catherine met him, that was his reality. A long sentence, a locked future, no promises of freedom. But something about him, something was familiar. Not his actions, not his past, but his world. Because Catherine understood that world better than most. She grew up in it. She knew what loyalty meant. She knew what silence meant. And most importantly, she knew that some people never leave that life, even when they're behind bars. They started talking, slowly, carefully, because in prison nothing goes unnoticed. But over time, a connection formed. Not fast, not dramatic, just real. Two people from the same kind of world, finding something in each other. And without realizing it, this meeting would lead to something no one expected. A wedding, inside prison walls. But that story is just beginning. Because before the wedding, before the vows, there was blood, power, betrayal, and a war inside the family that would change everything. Before Catherine ever walked into that prison, before she ever spoke to Bruno, his life had already been shaped by violence, power, and betrayal. He was born into it. Anthony Bruno Indelicato didn't grow up in a normal household. His father, Alphonse Indelicato, known as Sonny Red, was a powerful figure inside one of New York's most feared crime families. From a young age, Bruno saw how that world worked. Respect wasn't given, it was earned. And loyalty wasn't optional, it was survival. By his early 20s, Bruno had already stepped into that life. He wasn't just watching anymore, he was part of it. But in the late 1970s, something inside the family started to break. At the center of it all was a man named Carmine Galante. Galante had taken control while the official boss was in prison, but once he got power, he didn't want to share it. He ignored the rules, he kept profits to himself, and he stopped listening to anyone. That was a problem, not just for his own family, but for every powerful group in New York. Because in that world, no one is bigger than the system. So a decision was made, quietly, carefully. Galante had to be removed. July 12, 1979, a hot summer afternoon in Brooklyn. Inside a small Italian restaurant, everything seemed normal. People eating, talking, laughing. Galante sat at a table, relaxed, confident, with a cigar in his mouth. He didn't know this would be his last meal. A few minutes later, 3 men walked in. They didn't hesitate. They didn't speak. They walked straight toward the back and opened fire. Shots echoed through the restaurant. In seconds, it was over. Galante was gone. The message was clear. No one is untouchable. Among the men involved in that operation was Bruno. He was just 32 years old. That moment changed everything. Inside the family,
His name carried more weight, more respect, more power. But power always comes with a cost. After Galante was gone, the family didn't become stable, it became divided. Two sides formed. One supported the official leadership, the other wanted control for themselves. And at the center of that second group was Bruno's own father, Sonny Red. This wasn't just a disagreement, this was a war waiting to happen. Rumors spread quickly, plans were being made, weapons were being collected. Each side believed the other would strike first, so one side decided they wouldn't wait. May 5th, 1981, a meeting was arranged. It was presented as peace, a chance to talk, to settle differences. In that world, there was one rule for peace meetings: no weapons. And the three men who walked into that room trusted that rule. They shouldn't have. As soon as they stepped inside, everything changed. Gunmen appeared from hiding. No warning, no negotiation, just gunfire. It happened fast. One tried to run. He didn't make it. Another was hit instantly. The third, Bruno's father, tried to escape, but there was no way out. Within seconds, all three were gone. Bruno didn't just lose his father that day. He lost his protection, his position, his safety, because now he was a target. He disappeared, left New York, went into hiding. He knew how this worked. When power shifts, anyone connected to the losing side becomes a risk, and risks don't last long. There was even a plan to find him. Someone was assigned to track him down, a man known as Joseph Pistone. But there was one problem. That man wasn't who he claimed to be. He was working undercover, and soon everything would collapse. In 1981, the truth came out. The man inside was actually an agent. The damage was massive. Trust was broken. Secrets were exposed. And the response was immediate. The man who had unknowingly brought him in was eliminated. A message was sent to everyone. Mistakes like that have consequences. But Bruno? He was still alive, still hiding, still waiting. Eventually, he returned, because no matter what happened, that world always pulled you back. But by then, something bigger was happening. The government had started building a case, not just against one person, not against one group, but against the entire system. In the mid-1980s, one of the biggest trials in history began. Leaders from multiple families were charged for years of operations, for control, for violence, and Bruno's name was right there. He was charged for his role in the Galante killing. The same moment that once gave him power was now bringing him down. The trial was serious, the evidence was strong, and the outcome was clear. Bruno was sentenced. 40 years. No shortcuts, no quick exit, just decades behind bars. He was sent to a federal prison, far from the streets he once knew, far from the life he grew up in. By that time, his father was gone, his family was broken, and the world he once moved in was no longer his. But one thing didn't change. He stayed loyal. He didn't speak against anyone. He didn't try to escape the system. He accepted it. And that mattered. Years passed, slowly, quietly, until one day something unexpected happened. A visitor walked into that prison, not for him, but she noticed him. Catherine Burke, the daughter of a man who had also lived that life, the daughter of Jimmy Burke. Two different stories, two different paths, but the same world. And when their eyes met, neither of them knew it yet, but everything was about to change, because sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that last the longest.
By the time they truly started talking, both of them already understood one thing. This was not normal. This wasn't a simple connection. It wasn't built on chance. It was built on something deeper. Shared past, shared silence, and a life most people could never understand. Catherine Burke didn't walk into that prison looking for love. She went there to stay connected, to support people tied to her world, because that's how that life worked. You didn't forget your people, even when they were locked away. But then she saw him, Anthony Bruno Indelicato, quiet, calm, controlled. He wasn't trying to stand out. He didn't need to. His name already carried weight. At first, it was just small conversations, careful, measured, because in prison, every word matters, every move is watched. But slowly, something changed. They kept talking, then they kept meeting, and over time, that connection grew. They both understood each other in a way no one else could. Catherine grew up watching her father build power through fear and control. She knew what loyalty meant. Bruno grew up learning survival, discipline, and silence. He knew what it meant to follow the rules of that world. Both of them had lost their fathers. Both carried that weight. And maybe that's what brought them closer. Not emotions, understanding. They started writing letters, long conversations on paper, things they couldn't say out loud. Then phone calls, short, careful, but meaningful. Months turned into years, and somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a connection. It became a decision. They chose to get married. Not in a church, not in front of family and friends, but inside a federal prison. The location? A correctional facility in Indiana. Cold walls, bright lights, guards standing nearby. No music, no celebration, no white dress, no tuxedo. Just two people standing in front of an official. They signed the papers, they spoke their vows, and just like that, they became husband and wife. For most people, this would seem impossible. Why marry someone serving decades behind bars? Why choose a life like that? But for Catherine, this wasn't about comfort. It was about loyalty. She knew exactly who Bruno was, what he had done, what his future looked like, and she still chose him. Because in her world, loyalty wasn't optional. It was everything. And Bruno? He didn't promise her a normal life. He couldn't. All he could offer was truth, consistency, and a name that still held weight even behind walls. Jimmy Burke knew about the marriage. He was still in prison at the time, and he approved. To him, this wasn't just a wedding. It was a connection, a link between two powerful histories. 4 years later, everything came full circle. Jimmy Burke was dying, in a hospital bed, weak, tired, near the end. And once again, Catherine was there. She sat beside him, held his hand, just like before. The man who once controlled everything was now facing his final moments. No power, no control, just silence. And then he was gone. But his legacy didn't end, because Catherine carried it forward. Years passed. Bruno remained in prison. Time moved slowly. Days turned into years. Years turned into decades. But Catherine never left. She visited him again and again. She wrote letters. She stayed connected. She waited. Not for months, not for a few years, but decades. Most people would have walked away, chosen a different life, moved on. She didn't. Because in her world, you don't leave, you don't turn your back, you stay, no matter how long it takes. Eventually, that time came. After more than 30 years behind bars, Bruno was released. He was no longer young. Most of his life had passed inside prison walls. But when he stepped out, someone was still there. Catherine, the same woman who married him inside a prison, the same woman who waited all those years. They reunited, not as strangers,
not as people who moved on, but as two people who kept their promise. After his release, Bruno stayed quiet. No attention, no noise, just a low-profile life. But those who understood that world knew one thing: respect doesn't disappear. It follows you, even after prison, even after decades. Their story isn't just about marriage. It's about loyalty that doesn't break, connection that doesn't fade, and choices that define a lifetime. That wedding in 1992 was never just about two people. It was a message that even behind prison walls, even after years of trials, losses, and time, some bonds remain unshaken. Some legacies don't end. They continue, quietly, in the shadows. And some stories, they don't disappear. They just stay hidden.